which is very important because whenever you get a Supreme Court justice, that determines to a certain degree how the Constitution is interpreted. And so, whenever you have somebody on the Supreme Court who understands the black struggle, I haven't seen a lot of her rulings yet, but that kind of sets the stage for being able to equalize, things and how things work, right? So, and so that's always good. So now let me just go. This is Luke 20 verses 25 to 26, and because I want you to understand that religious liberty is not something that man came up with. It wasn't a man standard. It was a principle that came from God. Matter of fact, if you look at the 10 Commandments, right? The first commandment is what? If you break it down into 2 commandments, like Jesus said, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, right? So that is the first commandment. Those first 4 commandments actually are summarized in the concept of love God and also religious liberty. Because nobody is to interfere with your relationship with God. Your horizontal relationship, your vertical relationship with God, nobody is to interfere with that. Matter of fact, if there was only one created being in the universe, guess what his duty would be? To love God with all his heart, soul, and mind. Then when another created being came into existence, then he would love his neighbor as himself. So your first duty, the first duty of every created being is to God. Then your second duty is to man. And so that's how it flows, relationship to God and then man. So you got that vertical flow and then that horizontal flow. And that vertical flow is never to be interrupted by any human being. Government, person, law, nothing. That is your duty to God. And that is what God, when the judgment comes, that's did I love God? Did I have a relationship with God? Then again, I talk about the commandments. He's a jealous God because he don't want nothing to interfere with your relationship with him. So jealous is not a bad thing. Jealous is a good thing because he's like, look, I'm jealous when you mess with somebody else. When somebody intercepts that relationship, I don't want that to happen. I'm mad. And he's mad at the situation because he wants a love relationship. And so the 10 commandments are summed up in that. So Jesus said it in Luke 20, verse 25 to 26, and he said unto them, render to Caesar what, everybody? The things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things which are God's. And they could not take hold of his words before the people, and they marveled at his answer, and they held their peace. Why did they marvel? Because there was no such thing as civil and religious liberty in the Roman government. Caesar was the embodiment of God. Caesar was both divine and human. And so when he said that was actually novel. They were like, this Jesus, you're talking about me because this is trouble ground. Because if he had said that in the presence of Caesar, there'd have been a problem. But the Israelites knew based on the word of God that nothing was to intercept with their relationship with God. So they recognized that Jesus spoke wisely and they had nothing to say because he knew the power of the scriptures and not just the wording of the scriptures. Right? And so religious liberty is a principle that comes from the very throne of God. It originated with God. Right? So now let's look at Revelation chapter 13, verse 11. Okay? It says, and I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth. So now, let me just deal with that word another. The reason why the word another is used is because when you look at the first beast has all of these characteristics of the kingdoms that were in the old world. Another beast means that he's coming up this beast or this kingdom is coming up in a different place outside of the territory of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. So he's seen as another beast. He's not coming out of the sea, he's coming out of the earth, right? And so he's coming out of a different place, a different part of the world, where comparatively speaking, there were people over here, right? You had indigenous people over here. But comparatively speaking, compared to the old world where you got most of the population, it was comparatively unpopulated. It wasn't unpopulated because they came over here and killed some folks, and you know what I'm saying? But comparatively speaking, it wasn't as packed as the old world where you had kingdoms on top of kingdoms, on top of kingdoms, on top of kingdoms, just toppling over kingdom to kingdom, right? And so so this was kind of fertile ground compared to the old world. And so you had another beast coming up out of the earth. Now, it says he had 2 horns like a what, everybody? 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. Now, remember Jesus says, beware false prophets which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. You should know them by their fruits. And so the concept of a lamb symbolizes that this country will, in a sense, profess the principles of Christianity. All right? Not a Christian nation, make that clear. But in a sense, pronounce the principles of Christianity, which is totally different. Because the Protestant Reformation was built, for the most part, on the principles of Christianity. That's why they brought religious liberty to the forefront, but not necessarily Christian nation. 2 different things. principles of Christianity says every man deserves the right to serve God out of the dictates of his own conscience. Christian nation says I'm gonna force you to worship God because I'm in charge. So two different things. So the Bible teaches that a nation can have Christian principles, but there's no such thing as a Christian nation outside of the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel was the only nation that was allowed to have a theocracy. And the only reason they were allowed to have theocracy was because God himself was king. Not some viscerant. God himself was king. Y'all follow me? And when he did allow a king, remember when they asked for a king? And Samuel went to God and he was like, man, this is the problem. They don't want me to rule. God's like, no. Let me just tell you something. It ain't about you. It's about me. They don't want me to reign over them. They got a problem with me. They just using that as an excuse. So don't you be upset, Samuel. They don't want me to roll over. So what God did, he gave him a king, but the king still had to rule under God. And so when Solomon sat on his throne, you'll look at it in Chronicles, it'll say that Solomon sat on the throne of the Lord. It was still David's throne, which was God's throne, which ended up being Jesus' throne, right? So it was still God's kingdom. He just allowed, and then when the kings got real bad, he just said, you know what? Take up the diadem. I'm gonna overturn. There should be no more till my son comes. Just get off the throne. Bye. And then when Jesus came, he said, my kingdom is not of this world. So outside of Israel, there would never, ever be another theocracy because Jesus is the final king of the throne of David. And when he came and they said, will you be our king? He said, I will not be your king. I'm not going to do it. He sent him away. And he said, it won't happen until I come back again for my second return, right? So any theocracy outside of Israel is a false theocracy. I want y'all to understand that principle. So anybody who professes the union church and state outside of Christ, when he rejected it, would be something fake and phony and an arbitrary, something that's trying to take the place of God. So any union of church and state is something that would be trying to take the place of God because God hasn't given any other kingdom outside of Israel the authority to have a theocracy. Right? So the ideal government now is a republic in which the people rule by representation. That's what republic means. All right. We say democracy, republic, but really we're a republic, right? Because you rule by representation. Democracy means everybody come and vote at the table. That just can't happen. But we rule by representation, by republic. So there's two beasts come up out of the earth. He had two horns like a lamb, but he did with everybody. He spake as a dragon. And of course, those two horns represent civil and religious liberty. All right. Civil meaning that we don't have a king. Religious means that we don't have a church authority. All right. And so because of the horn and prophecy either represents a king or represents some kind of church authority that rules as a king. So we don't have any kind of, we don't have that in our country. And so we have a country that has those two horns like a lamb, those gentle horns that professes the principles of Christianity. But here's the problem. The problem is that he spake as a what, everybody? He spake as a dragon. Now, that spake as a dragon is not future tense. That's actually saying that as the beast was coming up out of the earth, at the same time, he was speaking like a dragon. So how we have interpreted prophecy, we try to say, oh, that's a future event. He has two horns like a lamb, and one day he's going to speak like a dragon. That's not what the Bible is teaching. The Bible is saying that he was speaking as a dragon as he was coming up like a lamb. Yeah, it's two in the same. He's just a false prophet. That's what the Bible starts calling it a false prophet because he's speaking, he's professing these principles, but yet when he opens his mouth and when he acts, when his laws go into place, it's not what he professes. Y'all follow me, please. Interrupt me, ask questions, disagree, but I'm trying to lay a foundation because I'm going to show you how that's all connected with the final movement. All right. So the nation has always been like that. Always been like that. Always had two horns like a lamb, and it's always spake like a dragon, and it spake like a dragon through its laws. I'm going to show you that. So let's look at the development of religious liberty in the United States. So the Bill of Rights was attached to the Constitution in 1791. All right. Bill of Rights is these 10 fundamental rights that are supposed to be for all mankind, right? Ideally, Declaration of Independence, we hold it to be self-evident that all men are created equal, right? So the Constitution was actually an outflow of the Declaration, the principles announced in the Declaration of Independence, right? So the Bill of Rights was ratified in 1791, and the reason why they did that is because the people didn't want a big government to take over, so they said, look, you got to give us these rights, and we want them. And the first amendment to the Bill of Rights, the very primary thing that they wanted on that thing was Congress to make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So it was very important at the beginning of the nation that they secured religious liberty. They recognized that was very important because all nations that didn't have religious liberty failed. They failed. It was bloodshed, it was death, political parties were trying to get in charge, they were enforcing their beliefs, and it was just unstable. You got one king in charge, he believes this. You got another king in charge, he believes this. You have another king in charge, he believes this. And so people were just like, you know what? They were persecution, bloodshed, death, and they had seen this thing for over 1,000 years. Remember, when they were founding the country, it was 1791. Y'all follow me? And so they had seen what life was like from Constantine all the way up to that time, and it was one long train of bloodshed and trouble for people who wanted to worship God and have their own belief system. Nations crumbled under this concept. All right. And so they said, no, we're not going through that. We're going to establish a nation that will, for the first time in history, a whole nation that gives religious liberty. There were other kings that tried it, but as a nation like this is like almost like a new thing. But they were doing it based on what they saw and what they experienced. All right. So it wasn't really an experiment. It was like, we've seen this thing and we know that this don't work. If we don't do it this way. So we're going to secure everybody's freedom. All right. And they recognize the prosperity of a nation comes when you have religious liberty. Because anybody can come, right? Anybody can bring the gift, the talents, and all that. Lost. Testing. Okay. Testing 1, 2. All right. We'll go back and forth with that. Okay. So now, here's the thing. There was this court case called Barron versus Mayor and City of Baltimore. All right. This is in 1833. Here was a man by the name of Barron who had some of his property interfered with by the state. He went to the federal government, to the Supreme Court, and said, look, you got to stop this state from taking away my property without just compensation. They're messing up my property. I'm making money. And so they're messing up my stuff, right? Here's what the Supreme Court told him. The Supreme Court told him that the Bill of Rights did not apply to the states. It only applied to the United States. Follow me. Y'all follow me? So whenever a Supreme Court passes down a ruling, it becomes law by judicial review. All right. If it's a case in controversy, they get it. They give an opinion. It becomes law. Okay. And so what happens is now when John Marshall was the Supreme Court judge at the time, he said, look, I hear what you're saying, but the reality is that you can't claim these federal rights on the state level because these are only federal rights. They don't apply to the states. Y'all want y'all to catch that, right? Remember, I told you the very first amendment was Congress will make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, right? So what did that mean? That means that if it meant that none of the Bill of Rights applied to the states, that means that religious liberty didn't apply to the states either. Y'all follow that? Supreme Court ruled that the Bill of Rights didn't apply to the state. Now, so here's how you understand this. Look at this. First Amendment to the Bill of Rights says what, everybody? What's that first word? Congress shall make no law respecting what, everybody? An establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Watch this. It doesn't say no state shall. Congress is the federal governing body for the nation. It doesn't say no state shall. So when the Constitution was ratified and the Bill of Rights was attached to the Constitution in 1791 and ratified, it did not guarantee these rights on the state level. It only guaranteed them on the federal level. So when the nation came into being, you only had religious liberty on the national level. You didn't have religious liberty on the state level. Y'all follow me? So in other words, if you were a citizen of Georgia, if Georgia didn't give you religious liberty, then you didn't have it. If Texas didn't give you religious liberty, you didn't have. Of course, those states were added later. I'm just giving you an example. So watch this. So in other words, in the original states, you only had religious liberty on the federal level. You didn't have it guaranteed on the state level. You only had it on the state level if the state itself guaranteed it. All right. So which means that the Constitution gave you religious liberty theoretically, but it didn't give you religious liberty practically. Because in order to be a citizen of the United States, you had to live in a state. And then the state at that time would give you citizenship of the United States. And so your citizenship was based on your state citizenship. And so if your citizenship was based on your state citizenship and the state didn't give you religious liberty, you couldn't claim it. Y'all follow what I'm saying? So it was there theoretically, but it didn't exist practically because the Bill of Rights did not apply to the states. It only applied to the United States. Because it didn't say no state shall, it said Congress shall not. So there were two things that when they were ratifying the Constitution, there were two things they left alone. They left alone state religion, they left alone slavery. Those are two main things. They didn't want to bother one of them because either one of those were the top of the nation. There's too much controversy with state religion because some states were Episcopalian, some states were this, and some states were that. You follow me? And so they laid the principles, but that's all they did was lay the principle. They couldn't apply it to the state. Okay, did I have a hand? Yes, sir. That was then, yeah. And I'm going to talk about how the transition took place. Yes. So I'm just giving some groundwork. That was then, yeah. That's right. So, again, these two clauses prevented the national government from exercising, establishing religion or prohibition of the exercise thereof. There was no such thing as state freedom of religion unless, again, guaranteed by the state itself. So, now, here's what happens. Yeah, the Dred Scott case comes in. Now the slavery issue starts colliding. Okay, so Dred Scott basically goes to sue for his freedom because he was taken to a free state, and he's like, because I was taken to a free state, I'm free. All right. So he goes to the Supreme Court suing, and the Supreme Court basically tells him you don't have the right to be here because you ain't nothing but property, and slaves have no right to have no jurisdiction in the federal court, and anybody who's descended from Africa or a slave has no citizenship because the Constitution did not include people of African descent. So what he did, he laid down the rule that if you are of African descent, you are not a citizen of the Constitution. You are not a citizen of the United States, and you can never be. You never was, never could be, never will be, right? And so what he did, y'all, was he made slavery a national issue because now people could take their slaves anywhere they want to take them because it was against federal law to take a person's slave because they would say, well, you can't take my slave because it's against my rights because it's my property. So he opened the door for slavery now to become a United States issue, from a state issue to a United States issue. Y'all follow that? So let me just read this. Supreme Court ruled that descendants of African slaves could never be citizens in the sense of the Constitution. Chief Justice Roger Taney ruling made black citizenship perpetually unconstitutional. He made it unconstitutional for free states to deprive slaveholders of their slaves, citing a due process clause of the Fifth Amendment, and made way for the entire nation to endorse slavery. That's what happened. That is what led to the that's the main thing that led to the Civil War. Because now slavery now becomes a national issue. All right? Becomes a national issue. And now people who have slaves, they're like, I'm going to take my slave everywhere. Ain't nothing y'all can do to stop it. Right? Lord have mercy. So now I want to read to you from Justice Taney's own words. Remember I told you, 2 horns like a lamb, beast like a dragon? Look at this. It is too clear for dispute that the enslaved African body, not intended to be included, and form no part of the people who framed and adopted this declaration, the Declaration of Independence, with the language as understood in that day would embrace them. The conduct of the distinguished men who framed the Declaration of Independence would have been utterly and flagrantly inconsistent with the principles they asserted. And instead of the sympathy of mankind to which they have so confidently appealed, they would have deserved and received the universal rebuke and reprobation. He was like, look, these folks who wrote this stuff had issues. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, if they had slaves, then, you know, then they weren't included, right? So he basically said by judicial review that black people of African descent could never, ever be citizens of this country. Go ahead. So, which means it's important for you to make sure that you vote, right? We're gonna talk about that a little bit. So, and so yeah. So let me go on my soapbox for a minute. Um, I might want to make soapbox. But yes, there is a problem with original interpretation of the Constitution because technically speaking, there's no such thing as an original interpretation because circumstances are changing. And so there are new issues on the table now that were not even conceived of by the drafters of the Constitution. And so you have to have enough wisdom to be able to apply these principles to a new era. And so it's very difficult to try to be an originalist unless you want to go all the way back. All right. Now you want to stick to you want to do the best you can to try to you know stick to the principles of the Constitution. But I do think that there's a problem when they say I'm an originalist or I'm a structuralist and all that kind of stuff. But there can be some issues with that, just based on the issues that we're dealing with in the United States, where things have changed. Things have changed, and so you have to be able to look at things in a way in which you stay true to the principles, but you don't do injustice. All right, so that's a whole nother thing about interpretation. All right, so now you have the Civil War, and after the Civil War, there are these series of amendments that are passed: the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment. Right. So the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. Right. I'm gonna jump to the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment gave black people the right to vote. Okay. Now, the most important amendment was actually, in my opinion, all right, based on my experience and how the Lord done slapped me upside the head about a lot of stuff, and based on what I'm seeing in court cases today, is the 14th Amendment. Everything, all the major court cases that we're seeing today is hinged on the 14th Amendment. All right, and here's the reason why. Because the 14th Amendment actually transformed the way that the Constitution was to be interpreted. And that's why I go back to the original interpretation, because the 14th Amendment actually expanded the Constitution's meaning in almost an unlimited way. All right. So here's the 14th Amendment. And I would say to you pretty much with it's probably the most important amendment that we have outside of in conjunction with the First Amendment. All right. And I'm gonna show you why. So here's the 14th Amendment. Because I used to be focused on the First Amendment, and I recognize that because I'm black, the First Amendment really didn't do me any good, because it didn't apply to me in the first place. You know, so whether I was, it didn't matter. I was a slave. My ancestors were slaves. So, none of that stuff applied to me. None of the Bill of Rights applied to me at all. Right. So now watch this. Look at the 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are what, everybody? Are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So this is what the 14th Amendment did. The 14th Amendment took the citizenship question out of the states and then put it in the hands of the United States. So now the states no longer control your citizenship. What happens is, if you're born in the United States, you are a citizen of the United States and the state in which you choose to reside. All right, y'all follow me? So in other words, if I'm born in Georgia, I'm a citizen of the United States and I'm a citizen of Georgia. If I'm born in Florida, I'm a citizen of the United States and I'm a citizen of Florida. If I'm born in Alabama, I'm a citizen of the United States and I'm a citizen of Alabama. If I'm born in Georgia and I move to Alabama, I'm still a citizen of the United States, but I'm no longer a citizen of Georgia. I'm now a citizen of Alabama. So your United States citizenship, in so many words, got priority over your state citizenship, and they had to do that so that black people could have citizenship rights, because the states would say, we're not giving them state citizenship. And so they took it out of the hands of the states and said, if they're born in the United States, they are de facto citizens of the United States. So from this point on, all people of African descent or whatever descent, if they were born on this soil, they are citizens of the United States. Matter of fact, somebody traveled here and have you over here, you're a child citizen, right? So, because if you're born or naturalized immigration in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction of, okay, so I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, now there are different rules for the military and stuff like that. I don't know all the military rules and when you're traveling abroad and all that kind of stuff. But go ahead. Automatic. Yeah. And there's a whole sermon on that principle as well. Um, here's the thing, y'all. I'm gonna go back to my point. Things haven't changed. Things haven't changed. Remember, y'all know the story. When the children of Israel would come out of Egypt, and Pharaoh was like, "They are more mighty than we. Now, unless they join to our enemies and fight against us and all that kind of stuff and get out of here. It's the same principle. It's that same mindset. Is if too many of them come over here, then we're gonna lose power. That's really the issue. It's about power. And so Pharaoh, and what did Pharaoh do? He demonized the Israelites to justify killing them. If I say they're gonna fight against us, then I can justify killing the male children to stop them from doing it. So you'll find people who are threatened and political parties who are threatened will demonize other individuals in order to start attacking them and justifying jailing them and doing all kind of crazy stuff. Same principle, same thing then, same thing today. And you can look at the biblical principles and you can tell who's crazy and who's not. I can show you some stuff from Judges where I can outline all kind of character traits that will show you when you have a dictator and when you don't, because the characteristics are the same. Political, you try to create a false narrative, you demonize people, you surround yourself with people who only do what you want them to do, you try to destroy your political enemies. All that stuff is the same. It ain't changed. Same principle. All right. And so that there. So let's go back to the 14th Amendment. So all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state where they reside. Watch this. No state shall make or what everybody or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of the citizens of the United States. Right. So now that is what you call the privileges and immunity clause. Now, here's what the original that clause was. The original intention of that clause was to take the Bill of Rights and pull them down to the states, which means that every black person at that time would have gotten all of those Bill of Rights immediately. Boom. But you know that they ain't gonna let that happen. So what they ended up doing was they Supreme Court ruling kind of pushed it off, but it ended up happening anyway. Yeah, I'll talk about it just for a minute. But let me continue here. So it says, and that's going back to the voice of the dragon. So it says, nor shall any state deprive any person of what everybody life, liberty, or property. That basically takes the due process clause, the Fifth Amendment, and now applies it to the states. And nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. It overturned the Dred Scott case for the most part. So I'm gonna go here. So the 14th Amendment pretty much reversed the order of things. And again, the 14th Amendment's original purpose, was to incorporate the Bill of Rights through the Privileges and Immunities Clause. Again, that means that all the Bill of Rights, religious liberty, all that stuff would have been immediately given to every human being who was born in the United States, and your United States citizenship would have superseded and overtrumped the state. So the state couldn't interfere with any of those rights that you have as a United States citizen, because your United States citizenship would have been superior to your state citizenship. All right, that was the intention. Right. So what they did was the Supreme Court, again, the voice of the dragon, ended up invalidating that clause and said, no, that's not what it means. It just means that black people have this, regular rights, and we're not going to interpret that to mean that the Bill of Rights are now in the states. We're not going to do that. All right. But praise God, it ended up happening anyway. But it just came through another clause, the due process clause, right? Which was that. Let me just kind of break this. I know I'm moving kind of fast. Let me just kind of break this down here. So whenever you look at a constitutional amendment, you see those little commas. Those commas kind of okay, let me just kind of show you how usually when you look at amendments, they're broken up into clauses. So you'll have this here: all persons born and naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state where they reside. That will be considered like a clause. Then no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. That's considered a clause. They'll rule on that by itself. Then you'll have nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That's a clause. Then you'll have nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of law. That's a clause. So all of those different clauses can have different court cases under those different clauses in which the Supreme Court will rule. All right. So you got like hundreds of cases on each of those clauses. All right, or whatnot. Just kind of giving you an example. So they wouldn't allow it to go through. Let me see here. It's got a little, yeah. So the Supreme Court wouldn't allow the Bill of Rights to come through this privilege and immunities clause, because it would have immediately given everybody those Bill of Rights privileges. So what ended up happening is, over the years, it ended up coming through this due process clause, depriving any person of life, liberty, or property without due process clause. So what they end up saying is, because religious liberty is a natural right of a human being, then every person should have that right, whether on the national level or on the state level. So it kind of came through the due process clause. All right. But there's a whole bunch of case law on that. But here's what I want to show you here. So watch this. All right, I'm gonna go here. So watch this. Here's what that did. So it wasn't till the 14th Amendment was ratified and began to go into effect that all of those Bill of Rights began to now be incorporated to the state. Y'all follow me? It was through the 14th Amendment that now I have religious liberty on the state level. It's through the 14th Amendment that now I have the right to be protected from searches and seizures on the state level. It's through the 14th Amendment that now I have all of these rights. They're now been pulled down to the state level, and all of that came through the 14th Amendment. Y'all follow me? So Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof is now on the state level, and it's on the state level as a result of the 14th Amendment. So if there was no 14th Amendment, there would have never been religious liberty on the state level. It would have stayed on the national level. I want y'all to follow me. It was only because of the 14th Amendment that now these Bill of Rights now start getting incorporated to the states. And now it's not just Congress shall make no law. Now it's state shall make no law. Now it's Georgia shall make no law. Now it's Texas shall make no law. Now it's North Carolina shall make no law. Now it's South Carolina shall make no law. But it all came on the back of the 14th Amendment. Y'all follow me? So, make no law? Yeah. So what that means is the state is not supposed to establish any national church or any national religion, and it's not supposed to prohibit your free exercise of religion. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. So 13, all of those amendments kind of came in play because they all were like they all came in like a sequence to secure the rights of black people, and then also included other folks as well. The Missouri Compromise, all that stuff led to all that stuff led to the it heightened this like fight and caused the Civil War, because what happened was it was started the Missouri Compromise, and then they had all this other stuff, and then it just was a mess. They were trying, and that's the problem. They were trying to compromise something that just wasn't right, and it only lasted for a while, and then they started doing popular sovereignty. Well, just let the people decide what they want. And so that then what would happen is all the abolitionists would rush to the state and vote against slavery, and then, so then you had the problems there with fighting between pro-slavery and against slavery, and then, so the Civil War was really about the issue of slavery. They can say what they want to say, but it was the issue of slavery that caused the Civil War. That was the national sin. And watch this, y'all. Not only was it a national sin, but slavery is the original sin of the United States. I want you to understand that's the original sin. That is the sin that has always marked the United States. And here's the issue, y'all. Not only has it always marked the United States, but it's the sin that they will struggle with until Jesus comes. Not maybe in the slavery, the type of slavery that we had, but the mindset. The desire to control somebody else's mind and conscience. I want you to see that. Remember this. Slaves didn't have civil or religious liberty. They had no liberty, civil or religious. Y'all follow me? So here's the prophetic turn. Here's why that's important. Because the same person or the same mindset that would take away the civil and religious liberty of a black person is the same mindset that would take away our civil and religious liberty in the last days. It's the same mindset. It's that same Christian, nationalistic, white supremacy mindset. It's the same thing. Y'all follow me? Let me give you the case in point. So let me just make this point real quick. So watch this. I want to make this point. It was only through the black struggle that we begin to get these rights on the state level. I want y'all to understand that. So watch this. There is a connection in our history. There's a connection between fighting for the rights of blacks and minorities and religious liberty. Are y'all following me? Because religious liberty only really came to the United States as a result of the Civil War and the desire to secure the freedoms of black people. Y'all follow me? So if there was no push to secure the freedoms of black people, there would not be religious liberty on the state level. It would still be theoretical and never practical. But because of the fight to free black people brought in these more secure rights, then what happens is now religious liberty is not just theoretically, now it's practically, because I have to live in a state. So there is a divine connection between the fight for black rights and the fight for minorities and the fight for those who are disfranchised and also the fight for religious liberty. In other words, when I fight against the rights of black people, when I fight against the rights of minorities, I'm fighting against my own rights and I'm fighting against religious liberty. When I fight for the blacks or right people, when I fight for the rights of minorities, I'm also fighting for my own religious liberty rights and I'm fighting for my rights in general. So there's a connection. So people who are trying to downtrodden black people and downtrodden those who are marginalized and downtrodden minorities and kick out immigrant and stump the immigration laws are also fighting against their own rights. They don't realize it. So watch this, y'all. Watch this. So the same mindset that would enslave a black man, the same mindset that would keep black people and other people from the rights that are given in those 14 amendments. Because you think about it, if the 14th Amendment was passed in the 1800s, right? Why don't we have those rights now? Why are we still fighting? Why is it such a fight if these things are guaranteed in the Constitution? Why am I still fighting for equal opportunity? Why am I still fighting for these rights if it's in the Constitution? Why am I still fighting for the right to vote if the right to vote has been embedded in the Constitution? And I would suggest you this. Watch this. Here, watch this. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the word vote was not in the Constitution until the 15th Amendment. So if voting was ever a guarantee and a constitutional right, it came in the 15th Amendment and it came with the fight for black rights. So now voting is really a constitutional right because it's right there in the Constitution. Before then, they could say, well, it wasn't in the original intent of the Constitution. Everybody can have the right to vote. Now it's there. But look at the fight. We're still fighting for the right to vote. Because your right to vote is intimately connected with your civil and religious liberty. Because if you can't vote, because if you can't vote, you don't have religion, you don't have liberty, because you ain't got no say. Pastor, go ahead. Okay. 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 Correct. Let me comment on that, Pastor. So the original privilege of voting was really for the white man, and the well-to-do white man. Um, that's it. But think about it. Think about it. Yeah. So the same. What I'm telling you today is the same fight that we've been fighting for all these years. It's the same thing today. That same person that would diminish your right to vote is the same person who has the slavery mindset. The same person who would not want to give black people equal vote or immigrants equal opportunity is the same person who has that slavery mindset. That same person who looks for ways to try to demonize other people or try to come up with means to mass incarceration is the same mindset it's the same mindset. So y'all follow me? So the same person who would do all of those things is the same person who would form or seek to form a union with the state so they can carry out their plan. So all of this white national Christian stuff that we see that is rising, where people are boldly saying we need a Christian nation. They're boldly saying this Constitution included God and all this kind of stuff. And when they say included God, they're talking about it's supposed to be a union of church and state. They're not talking about the principles of Christianity. They're talking about the Christianity that controlled the state, like Constantine. So when you see that mindset, you know automatically that that's the mindset that would enforce, that would form a union of church and state and enforce those things. Y'all follow what I'm saying? So when you look on the news, if you how you tell is, does this person support democracy? If the person doesn't support democracy, then you know that person is on the in the other camp. Any person who wants to secure their right to vote means that person thinks more clearly in the right to a democracy or Republican nation. And when I say Republican, I'm not talking about the political party. I'm talking about the principles of representation. But anybody who wants to take away those rights would also want to take away all your other rights. And y'all follow me on that? So you got to look for the characteristics when you look at what's happening in our country. Yes. Who had a question? Well, you know what? You want to comment on that? Okay. Okay. Correct. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. You have to, and that's what I'm saying. You have to listen to the listen. Keep your ears open and listen. And I want to make a, I'm gonna make a comment on the Roe versus Wade in just a minute. Go ahead. So, she don't want the mic. She wants to.
Okay, that's all right. When the law passed about Roe versus Wade, I was excited because I am anti-abortion. But I had a conversation with somebody that made me realize that it's not about abortion, it's about choice. And the person having the choice to decide for themselves because whatever decision they make, they've got to answer to their God. But what happens is we're both, Satan, like I think the pastor mentioned this morning, he's very deceptive. So it makes me feel, oh, I'm supporting the right values, but at the same time, I'm fighting against myself. Does that make sense? So, yeah, it kind of, who are in the middle of the road. I'm not saying that there are people who are struggling with what they should vote for, people who are learning more about scripture, elected officials, people who make these decisions and are in power. They are not middle of the road. They might say something, they might vote something, because I deal with this every day. You think you got to vote because you talk to them, and this is what they believe, and you're like, I got this, they got to vote. But when it comes to the vote and it's public, they change their vote because they get political pressure. Or they got somebody saying, I'm going to pull my endorsement. And that's why they can't deal with me because I know what I believe and I say what I say. And I'm attacked every single day for it. So elected officials, people in power, they're not middle of the road. Now, they might vote a certain way, but if you listen to the underlining tones, that's a whole other thing.
And let me just say this real quick. Let me make a comment on the Roe versus Wade issue. Um, because let me just say this: the overturning of Roe versus Wade is not really about saving the life of a child, and I think that was clearly articulated. It's about political power, and it's about political muscle. Okay, and so what's happening is you got to realize this is something that's been trying to be done since Roe versus Wade happened. Okay, so what Roe versus Wade did, according to political observers, constitutional lawyers, and stuff like that, is that Roe versus Wade was the calling card for conservative Christianity to come together and say we got to take our government back. That was the calling card. Okay, now we got a reason to stand together, and we can come together, and we can now make these moves. And so they've been working toward this for a long time. Got the president that they wanted to be able to push their agenda through. Got their Supreme Court justice, and now they're like, now we got the court. We can do whatever we want to do. All right. And so what we're going, based on what I'm seeing, because Supreme Court justices can say whatever they want about them being unbiased and them being constitutional. They have a leaning. They lean in one direction or they lean the other direction. And if you look at their past rulings, you're going to see how they're going to rule in the future. All right, by pattern. That's how they pick them. We look at their past rulings and then we say, man, they're going to rule in this direction. So they know that they have a Supreme Court that is leaning in a certain direction. So what's happening is now the rights that we thought were secure and stuff we thought was just this law. Well, that's if you so that's if you want to make change to the Constitution. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was asking that in order to have to take, correct?
Yes, if you want to ratify. So what the Supreme Court does, here's the power of the Supreme Court, and this is what people don't realize. The Supreme Court has the power to interpret what the Constitution means. That means if they say it means Christian nation, then it means Christian nation. If they say it means this, it means that. So and with that type of authority, there's this push to control the Supreme Court so that we can get the Supreme Court to interpret the Constitution in the way that we want it to be interpreted. So the Supreme Court justices can interpret away our religious liberty, and so when laws are passed that restrict our religious liberty, the Supreme Court gives it a pass. You follow me? So it's about having all of your docs in order so that we can get away with whatever we want to get away with. And that's just the place we're in now. We're in the place we're in now where if I get my political party in alignment, then I can get away with anything. That's kind of where we are. So with that, um, sorry, we have some more questions right there. I know I saw some more hands back there. I want to make sure. Any hands back there? Any questions? Any hands before we? All right. Yes. Yes.
Make it so hard for our people to come in and vote.
Yes.
You've got hundreds of people at just one voting station. To sometimes travel in the other areas in the United States. They have to travel miles to
Yes.
get in to vote.
Yes.
And so slowly they're redistricting, setting new lines where once my voting area was right by my house, now it's a little bit further out. And I'm like, what's going on here?
Yeah. So what I'm saying to you is this, and I don't know what I'm saying to you is this, is they want you to get caught up on stuff like mask mandates. Follow me, please. They want you to get caught up on stuff like vaccine mandates. They want you to focus on that so hard that while you're looking in that direction, your voting rights are being swept away. Are y'all following me? Vaccine mandates have been out for a long time. They ain't nothing new. Mask mandates are it's something that you have just because we have a national crisis going on. You have to wear the mask mandate. Once the crisis is over, the masks are gone. But when your voting rights are taken away, it's much harder to get those back. Y'all follow what I'm saying? And so people play the switch. Let's go fight the federal government against. We ain't gonna wear no mask. COVID ending. We still fighting. We mask. You know what is mask, right? But at the same time, those same people who are saying that are trying to take away your voting rights. And when you look in the next direction, you're gonna look back and your box gone. You got to travel, So that's what I'm saying. So true religious liberty issues are those same issues: fighting for equal rights, fighting for voting rights, fighting for those equal opportunities, fighting for people to get treated equally. That's real religious liberty issues, not this decoy stuff like mask mandates and vaccine mandate. All that stuff is decoys. And you have people preaching sermons, they get 100,000 views saying that the government about to take over and pass these laws because they force us to wear masks. While the real people are stripping away your voting rights. So watch this. Let me just say this. Here's how I believe that this stuff is going to go down. In order to make a union of the church and state in a government like ours, you have to be able to vote away your rights. Y'all follow what I'm saying? If it ever goes to the docket and your rights are on the table, but your voting rights have been taken away, then you won't have no voice. So people can vote away your rights, and then you can't do nothing about it because you let them take your voting rights away. So what if there was a law on the state level that said we're going to institute these religious laws for this particular purpose, and your right to vote already been taken away? All right. I'm sorry. You want to comment on that? Okay. Okay. Yes. Sir.
What is I'm hearing that maybe you can explain it.
Yeah.
They're saying that even though vote with the Republicans here in Texas, they don't like that particular vote. They have the right to change it. Have you heard?
Yeah, so I don't know all the rules. I haven't studied the actual, the new rules and new laws in detail. But I do know that Republican states are making it more difficult for people to vote. And what happens is if you call these they pass what you call these facially neutral laws, which means they're neutral on the face, but their impact is discriminatory. And so they get away with it by saying, oh, this law applies to everybody. But they know that when they apply the law, it's going to indiscriminately attack black folks. Y'all follow what I'm saying? That's a tactic that is used. We'll pass a law. It's not discriminatory in word, but it's discriminatory in effect. And people do that with religious laws too. They'll pass a law and won't have nothing about religion, but they know that when this law is passed, it's going to affect people of this particular religion. And so there are different political tactics to be able to discriminate against your rights. And one of those ways is, and sometimes Supreme Court will give it a pass and say, well, it doesn't say it in the thing, and so we're not going, But some will look at the effect and say, well, it don't matter what they say, it's the effect of the law that matters. In my opinion, it's the effect of the law, not the face of the law. It's what the law does, right? Not what the law says. Okay. All right. No, 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 no. Testing one, two, one, two. And so, yeah, you heard it, right? And so that's, it's not that complicated. It's not that deep. It's really about taking advantage of the rights that we have while we have them before they're taken away, and making sure that we participate where we can. So I don't have any more on this particular presentation. So anybody got any questions or anything? But again, I want to emphasize that the same spirit that will take away those rights will also take away your other rights. And so that's what we're seeing take place in our country now, that characteristic. And so we're shifting in that direction. And so if anybody got any questions, any comments about anything, maybe, oh, Pastor, go ahead.
One thing that he said that was vitally important is that there are laws that are passed that they try to make seem innocent, but whose whole purpose is to disenfranchise you. There are a whole lot of us who don't have a state ID or don't have a driver's license. There are a whole lot of them who don't have a state ID or have a driver's license. So how do they fix it? If you have a hunting license or you have a fishing license, you can vote. How many inner city Negroes got a hunting license? How many inner city Negroes got a fishing license? I see 2 hands. So they made a law that seemed innocent. After all, you need a driver's license to drive. You need a driver's license to get on a plane. You need a driver's license for identification for anything. How many of y'all fly? That's amazing. Because there are a whole lot of black people ain't getting on no plane. So they don't care if they don't have an ID. So the point that he was making was they make these laws to make it seem innocent when they are purposely discriminating. I'm gonna give you another one, and I'm not ignoring you, but I'm old and I forget my point. They will, one of the latest things that they did that was directly affecting us. When you go to vote, you can't take no water with you. You can't take no food. They changed that. They said you can't take no food, you can't take no water, and if you provide food or water to a person who's waiting in line, you can be arrested. Now, who does that affect? Us. Who got high blood pressure? Hello. Who's mostly affected with high blood pressure, diabetes, got to take their medicine, got to take it on time. So you stand it in line in 100-degree heat and can't have no water to take your medicine. What you gonna do? You gonna get out of line and get your water and take your medicine. Are they gonna let you go back where you were? No, you gonna go back to the end of the line. So you in what? Catch 22. Will you ever get to vote that day? Probably not. That was done on purpose. They moved the voting boxes way out somewhere. Okay? And then they turned around and said, no more souls to the polls. The church can't transport you to go vote no more. A lot of our inner city people don't have transportation. They don't have cars. The whole reason we had the Souls to the Polls drive was to help the people who couldn't get to the poll to vote to the poll. We load them up on the church bus and we take them to vote. If they make a law that says we're going to move the poll way out here and then we're going to tell the church you can't take them to vote, what have they just done? Disenfranchise a whole bunch of black folk. So what he's saying is happening. And particularly in states like Texas. And because Texans are afraid, they are scared to death. The state is turning purple. It ain't no red state no more. There's too many brown people and black people here. And so they're doing everything they can to try to hold on to power. And the only way they can do it is to block you from voting. The other thing that they did was change the voting precincts. So they redrew the map. So where you have a high concentration of black people, they split it all up. So you got a little group of blacks in this district that's almost all white. So they have diluted your vote so that, yeah, you had a right to vote if you can get to the poll. You can go and you can vote, but you can't stop and take your medicine because you can't have no water. But if you get through all that, your vote still ain't gonna matter because they have split the black vote up so that the white are in the majority in most of the voting precincts. In the Dallas-Fort Worth area, they made one big precinct for black and brown. And then they got 14 or 15 almost all white. The count is not by number of votes. The count is by precinct. So your vote has just been nullified. That's what the Electoral College is all about. They never intended one man, one vote when they founded this nation. They call it mob rule. So they designed it so that when you vote, you're not voting for the president. You're voting for an elector who then votes for the president. And the way it's set up now is totally unfair because the majority of the people are not represented by the electors. That's how 45, because I refuse to even call his name, that's how 45 got elected. Because he lost the first time by 3 million votes. But the middle of the country and the deep south voted for him. And when you add up their electoral votes, he won. Even though if you counted one man, one vote, he lost by 3 million. He made such a mess of things that he couldn't even cheat and win. He tried his best, but he couldn't even cheat and win. Because this time he lost by 8 million votes. There's no way to fix that, even with the Electoral College. But what you got to be concerned about is that the next guy who's coming up the pike got sense. He is not a nitwit. He's Harvard educated. And he knows how to manipulate the system. He's done it in Florida. And some of the most draconian rules are in place in Florida. All the stuff I just talked about, how they blocking black and brown people from voting, is in place in Florida. It's rock solid. And if he gets in, he's going to apply it nationwide. DeSantis, the governor of Florida, he is not an idiot. He is very intelligent, very smart, but he's diabolical. He is Trump with sense. That's the bottom line. I'm gonna hit this and then I'm gonna leave it alone because everybody's tired, and I promised my sister. The powers that be, when I say powers that be, I mean the rich Caucasian people that actually run this country. They have always operated the same way. Divide and conquer. They have always been able to convince poor white people that it is in their best interest to vote against themselves and to fight against themselves. It started with the Revolutionary War. And every war in this country, they have convinced the poor whites that it was in their best interest to go against their best interest. All the language about liberty and freedom that's in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, all this talk about give me liberty or give me death, they weren't enslaved. They were enslaving people. The liberty that they were talking about was their liberty not to follow what the king wanted them to do. The King of England had supported the colonies because the Indians and the French had united against the English. Because the English had done what they always do, try to subjugate the people, the indigenous peoples where they live. The indigenous people here, we call them Indians. They were Native Americans. They're not Indians, never been Indians. Indians live in India. Okay? Columbus was a fool. He thought he had reached India. And so he named the people he saw when he landed Indians because he was ignorant. But bottom line is, the king had sent an army and sent the navy and everybody over here to help the colonists defeat the French and the Indians. So then he said, I have expended a whole lot of money to help y'all. So what y'all need to do now is to pay your fair share of taxes to help defray those expenses. What have rich white people always rebelled against? Paying taxes. And so they convinced their poor brothers and sisters that it was in their interest to go to war with the king because the king wasn't being fair. Taxation without representation. So you got all these port dirt farmers who are going to fight for liberty when they ain't even being oppressed. And a whole lot of them died to help these rich white people not to have to pay taxes to the King of England. They did the same thing with the Mexican-American War. They did the same thing with the Civil War. Only the argument this time was, we need to fight to maintain our rights and our liberty. What rights? What liberty? Our right to own slaves. Our liberty to keep them slaves. Our liberty and right to spread slavery to places where it's not. The vast majority of those people didn't even have a slave. They couldn't afford a slave. They were poor dirt farmers. But you know what got them over? What made them go ahead and fight? Because they said to them, if you let the Yankees free the slaves, they'll be equal to you. At least you ain't a nigger. At least you ain't a slave. You ain't got nothing. You ain't never gonna have nothing and ain't never gonna be nothing. But you ain't a slave. You ain't a nigger. But you will be if you let them free them. That same argument is still working today. It's still working today. And so they will vote against their own interests because at least we're better than them. Whether the they is black folk or brown folk, at least we better than them. They're still doing the same stuff. Like you said, the more it changed, the more it stayed the same. When they passed the big tax break that they've been trying to pass for years and years under Trump, how many of the poor whites benefited from it? They got a check for what, $700-800? Those rich white folk, hand over fist. But the poor dupes that went out there and voted to get them in, to give them this big tax break, didn't get nothing. Same thing. They've been doing it all along, and they're still doing it. Now they got them all worked up over abortion. They got them all worked up over gun rights. Second Amendment was never about y'all. They never intended for you to have a gun. The Second Amendment was to keep the slaves in line. There were too many of us, and they couldn't control us. So they gave authority to any white man. Does this sound familiar? They gave the authority for any white man to own a weapon. And any white man could stop any black man on any time for any reason and make him prove that he had permission to be out. Doesn't that sound like what we just heard down in Georgia? Where there was a black man who just went for a run and got murdered in cold blood by two white men who took it upon themselves to question him as to what he was doing and why he was out there. And when he refused to let them punk him, shot him down in cold blood. Ain't nothing changed. It's the same stuff they've been doing. The Second Amendment was all about controlling y'all. You don't believe it. This is supposed to be an open carry state. Huh? How many of us you see walking around with a gun on our hip? You see them rednecks with them all the time. Let one of y'all walk in the grocery store with a gun on his hip. You probably won't get out. Somebody gonna call the police because they're gonna be afraid that you must be robbing the place. You could only be robbing the place if you got a gun on your hip. Why would a black person need a gun on their hip? Some white person will declare they're afraid for their life and shoot you down in cold blood. Second Amendment ain't about you. Never been. And ain't now. My brother's preaching the truth. I'm done.
So, okay.
So, what are the steps that you take to make an intelligent vote? What are the steps do you take to make an intelligent vote?
Yeah, I think the first thing is um, to inform yourself on the issues and know, listen, know what you're voting for. I think ignorantly voting is dangerous. Um, Listening, looking at the issues, and then being aware of all the voting times and all that kind of stuff. Local voting. I mean, I know maybe you can comment a little bit more detail on that. But I think just educating ourselves on the whole process and then being aware of the issues that are on the table. Um, and I think also, I think we need to get more involved in what we are, definitely as a church. Let me just say this real quick. One of the lessons I take from Daniel 2, if you notice Daniel 2, right? Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. Don't know the dream, don't know the interpretation. Sends out this death decree, just kill all the wise men, right? Go to Daniel's door, knock on his door, boom, 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 boom. Okay, Daniel, come out, it's time to die. He's like, what's going on, right? And so Arioch informs him, hey, the king wants to know the dream and the interpretation. He's saying the wise men to get killed. Daniel says, let me go into the king, let me talk to the king. Goes into the king, talks to the king, says, hey, king, give me some time, and I will give you the interpretation, so on and so forth, right? Goes back to Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. That was their slave names. But anyway, and they have a prayer meeting, and they pray. And when they pray, here's what happens. God gives Daniel the dream, and then he gives the interpretation of the dream, right? So God gives Daniel the solution to the problem that's taking place in society. Then Daniel takes that solution, goes to the king, and says, "Hey, I've gotten an interpretation of the dream. God has shown me the dream and interpretation." Begins to tell him, and he solves the problem, right? So I think as a church, um, not only do we need to, that's a couple of things we need to do. I think we need to be more involved. We need to know what the issues are, but we need to also be forthright in helping to solve issues that are taking place, being engaged in the community. So much so that we know what's taking place. We're helping to shape policy. Um, all those kind of things. I think that we'll have more things on the table if we were just more involved as a church. And I'm talking more of an aggressive stance more than a proactive stance. Not just voting. Voting is important, but also getting out there and advocating and making points and saying, "Hey, this is what we need to do for this," and then get that on the table and then encourage people to vote for that. And so and I know that's something that we can do better as a Seventh-day Adventist church, because we've kind of isolated ourselves, to a certain point, and we're not in my opinion, we're not engaged enough in the community to even know what's going on in the community when things are taking place. And I think the Bible leads us an example all the way through with Ezra having a relationship with the king and all that kind of stuff. And I think we can just be more proactive in educating ourselves, putting ourselves in circles where our voice can be heard, and also just knowing the issues that are at hand on the table and all these kind of things. And I'm speaking for myself, just generally speaking, we all need to do a lot better in being involved in what's happening around us.
One thing I think we should do as a people is not to side with either side, to have them come to us. Because right now 99 I would say a good portion here would go Democrat. Okay? And we should have them support us for what we want for our community, as far as what's important to us, what our community needs, things the church needs. We just randomly go in and just go DDD straight down. Unless you know every policy that they are issuing, we're just blindly voting. And so they can promise us 4 terms, everything, but nothing happens. But we can hold them accountable by not taking either side and having them put our vote.
So let me tie in something here from Revelation 13. I think we have. Oh, okay. Sister Phipps, go ahead. Okay. Yeah. 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 So yeah, I need some time to think about that question, because I've heard that question come up about getting rid of the electoral college, and letting the majority speak. I think there is some validity to that, because the system is really rigged. And judges and Supreme Court justices, they all know that. They know there's a lot of rigging taking place. They acknowledge that in some of their Supreme Court rulings or their dissents. They like, we know this stuff happening. We see it. Ain't no way you got a jig jag here and all that kind of stuff. And everybody in the jig jag is black on the outside of the little squirky line. But I need some time to think about that. You know, I know there are some rationale for the electoral college, and then there's good rationale against the electoral college. But I need some time to kind of really. I haven't really thought on that for a while. I need some time to think. I don't want to just say anything randomly and splat it out. But yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. But let me say something on Revelation 13. I just want to read a couple of verses, beginning with verse 11 of Revelation 13, and just tying this whole thing in. What we talked about voting. I think it says, and I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth. He had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And he exercised all the power of the first beast before him, and causes the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. All right. And he doeth great wonders, so that he makes fire come down from heaven in the sight of on the earth in the sight of men, and deceives them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast. Here's what he says, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast which had the wound by the sword and did live. Okay, did y'all hear that? So based on the prophetic word, the image of the beast and the institution of a church and state in the country is going to come as a result of people voting in that direction. It's going to say to them that dwell on the earth that they should do this. So voting is going to be the key way in which the image of the beast and all this stuff is formed in the United States. It's going to be a vote. I think it's going to get to the point where there's going to be a push, in my opinion, for an amendment to the Constitution to make this a Christian nation by law. Here's why I say that. I say that, number one, because that's what the prophecy says. It's going to say to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image of the beast by the womb, by the sword, and did live. Why don't we make our nation a Christian nation just like this system was? Because if this system lasted that long, we want longevity, then we need to get back to God. Because our country is falling apart. That's going to be the rationale behind it. Our country is falling apart, and if we don't get back to God, then we will no longer have a country. That's what's going to go out, right? They're already saying it. That's really what's becoming the platform of the neo-Republican Party. It's becoming the extremists. That's what they're saying. They bold like, hey, we need to get back to God. We need a Christian nation. Who cares about this? I mean, we're hearing that. And then we're seeing these major evangelicals that are having these pet rallies and having all the people say we need to take our legislative branch, our executive branch, and all these branches back to God, and they're making these covenants with God about taking their country back. And that's what they're talking about. They're talking about making this a Christian nation by law. The second reason I believe it's going to happen like that is because that's what happened in the past. There was an organization, you can look this up, called the National Reform Association, whose sole purpose and aim was to get an amendment to the Constitution to make this a Christian nation by law. It's called the National Reform Association. They had a whole thing, how they got started, how they were trying to amend the Constitution and make this a Christian nation by law. That party died out. But what's happening is, if you look at the characteristics of that National Reform Association back in the 1800s, the late 19th centuries, and you look at what's happening to the Republican Party, they're identical. They're identical. And here's how you know, I'm going to get you back there, brother. Here's how you know they're identical. When a political party that claims Christianity is willing to do whatever it takes to get their agenda accomplished, then you know they've apostatized. Whenever they get to the point where it's by any means necessary, the end justifies the means, then you know that they are now moving in a direction in which now they're willing to do whatever it takes to get control of the government. If it means lying, if it means manipulating the facts, if it means putting a person in power who we know doesn't represent our principles, it doesn't matter as long as that person accomplishes the agenda, because the idea is the end justifies the means. Caesar said, be just unless a sovereign attempts to break the laws, for sovereign power alone can justify the cause. We want power to do whatever it takes to get it. And that's what we're seeing in our politics. Now, I'm not saying there are perfect political parties. There's no such thing as a perfect political party. But you try to find the best alignment you can, and you fight for the right principles. You fight for democracy. You fight for the right for people to have equal opportunity. You fight for those things. But whenever you see a political party that's swerving drastically in a direction and they saying it, like it ain't like they ain't saying it, they saying it. They out of their own mouth. We believe that we need a Christian nation. We believe we want to get back to God. They telling you. And even people within the political party are saying something is wrong with my party. Something is definitely wrong. Some have the courage to speak out, some don't. But there is a parallel for that. There's parallels that you can see, and I'm telling you, it's going to be, according to prophecy, It's going to be the conservative national Christian mindset that is going to try to enforce Christianity. That's going to be the power. That's going to be the leading factor. It's not going to be the other stuff. It's going to be the what you call, I call it the Puritan form of religious liberty. I want religious liberty for myself, but I don't want it for nobody else. Because when the Pilgrims came over to America, they ain't get the same rights to other people who wanted the same have rights. They come in, oh, I want to worship this and do. They're like, oh, they burn you, whatever they got to do, get rid of you, And so it's the religious liberty that we talking about is liberty for myself, liberty for everybody. The religious liberty that they talking about is religious liberty for me, and then not for anybody else. So once I get my rights, then I'm going to now enforce what I believe on you. So when they say religious liberty, they don't mean what we mean. They don't mean rights for me and right for everybody else. They mean rights for me, but rights for nobody else. That means I get to determine what you believe. I get to pick what I believe, but I get to determine what you believe. That's the religious liberty that's going to infuse itself upon the state and take control of it. All right. You had a question right there? Yes. So thank you for that. So remember I talked about this morning? He shall think to change times and laws. He shall intend to change times and laws. Key factor. So what's going to happen is the major push is going to be to make this a religious nation, right? But that thrust is going to be on the back of a national Sunday law. Now, that ain't nothing. Look, think about this. I want you to understand this. That is nothing that's peculiar to Seventh-day Adventists alone. Let me tell you why. Because it already happened in the past. Yes. So yes. So it's going to be a movement that is going to shock the entire world. Correct. It's going to move throughout the entire world. From this nation, I believe from this nation all over the world. So once this nation sets the example of saying we need to make ourselves a Christian nation, we need to get back to God, and we begin to now enforce religious laws, and we begin to take away religious liberty in this nation, all the other nations are going to follow suit. And so we're going to see a swift transition in which when we make an image to the beast or an image to the papacy, we enforce the same laws, we start doing this stuff, then the whole world will wonder after the beast as that stuff, and it's going to cycle through the whole entire world. There's going to be strength, and think about this. Revelation 13 says that there's going to be miracles, supernatural stuff that's going to start happening, that's going to start calling people to pay attention to these things. And they're going to say, man, we need to get back to God. Here's the great miracle working power of God, but it's going to be the power of demons working miracles. Yeah, so here's the question on that. I think that's going to culminate it. But there will be other factors that when Satan does literally impersonate Christ, then he's just gonna rubber stamp it. Yeah, y'all doing the right thing, and then make it more difficult for those who are trying to worship God to be able to have any kind of freedom at all, because they're gonna say these group of people right here, they're disobeying me, they're not doing what I asked them to do, and so then you're gonna have that death decree just like they had in Esther. We're gonna exterminate all these people in one day. But just like that thing was turned around, and they thought they were gonna kill him, and the Jews turned around and they defended themselves. We got somebody that's gonna come through the clouds. Come on, somebody say amen. And when they think they're gonna get rid of us, every mountain and island we moved out of its place. The heavens will roll back like a scroll. And Jesus is gonna come rescue his people. So we're looking for these things to happen. And there's going to be a union according to Revelation chapter 16, there's going to be a union between paganism, Catholicism, and apostate Protestantism. They're going to all unite for one final purpose, and it's all going to happen. And it's going to be spirit of demons working miracles and all that kind of stuff. All right. Now, let me say this last thing real quick while I'm on that. Pastor. Yeah, it is happening. Yeah, 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 yeah. When I say going to happen, what prophecy usually gives you is the culmination, but there are always steps to it. You know, stuff don't just happen overnight. It's been happening behind the scenes. We just didn't see it coming. Yes, 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 yes. Also, another theory I have too, as well, is based on the way the Supreme Court is ruling and throwing things back to the states, and pushing back the federal government from being able to interfere um, with the states' autonomy to be able to decide certain things on the state level. I'm almost beginning to think that we are going to at some point lose our religious rights on the state level, and it's going to culminate back to the national level. So I'm looking at the way things are happening, because things are being saying, you know, the federal government has too much say in what the state does. Let's push them back, and let's give the states the freedom to discriminate and do what they used to do. Y'all follow what I'm saying? Because the states could discriminate and the federal government couldn't do anything about it. So with all the civil rights and all this stuff happening, the civil rights movement and the civil rights amendments gave the federal government the authority and the power to now interfere with state discrimination. So the federal government now can interfere and stop the state from passing a religious law. Y'all follow what I'm saying? But if the federal government is pushed out of the way, then states can start getting away with things that they couldn't get away with before in the past. And there'll be nobody to slap their hand and say, stop it. So yeah, so states' right is code for white supremacy, and that's historical precedence. It's always been that way. It's not going to change. States' rights mean let me do what I want to do and stop getting in my business. Let me control what I want to do and stop getting in my business. So that's what it means on a historical pattern. And let me just say that historical pattern. That's what it means. But so let me go on another tangent here. And I'm gonna just say this just to give us a little bit of hope here. Revelation 18, Revelation 8. Yeah. Yeah, let me give you a little hope here. Let me just read this as we get ready to close out. I want to read Revelation 18 because God's message is going to go forth. But let me read this here. Revelation 18 says, after these things, I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the whole earth was lightened with his glory. He cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and the cage of every unclean bird. Um, Despite what the state is going to do, despite them doing these things, God is going to give his people the power to be able to preach through all of that. And the gospel is going to go forward despite our rights being taken away. So our rights being taken away is not going to stop the truth from being preached. And here's what's going to happen. As our rights are taken away, the Holy Ghost, come on, y'all, going to be sent down with great power so that we ain't going to be afraid. Like Peter, I ought to obey God rather than man, right? Preaching anyhow. And so God is going to do that. And here's what we have messed up. And I'm going on a tangent about our theology. Is we term that as the latter rain, coming down, and God's people being given that power to be able to preach against the conflict that we're going to go through as these laws are altered and as these laws change. And so a lot of times, we've taught this theology in the Adventist church that in order to receive the latter rain, you got to be perfect. You got to do everything right to get the latter rain. But you know what the Bible actually teaches on that? You got to go. Your homework is Joel chapter 1, Joel chapter 2. Here's what I discovered. With the latter rain, Joel 1 and Joel 2. I discovered that the latter rain is not for perfect people. That the latter rain is for repentant people. People who recognize that without the power of God, I can't do anything. People recognize that if God don't give me power, I won't be able to carry this thing forward. Are y'all follow me? The concept in Joel was that the people of God were living a life that was they just weren't doing what God was asking them to do. And one of the things that God would do when they wouldn't do what God asked them to do, and I never understood this, but then I understood it a couple of days ago. He would withhold the rain. Follow me. And when he would withhold the rain, everything would dry up. There'd be no plants, there'd be no trees, there'd be no vegetation, the animals couldn't find food. And I'm like, why would God just dry up everything and just stop it? Number one, so that they could recognize that their resources come from God, right? But then number two, watch this, y'all. Watch this. When there was no rain, there was no vegetation. There was no grain. There was no oil. There was no wine from the wine press. When they would go to the sanctuary service, where they would offer offerings, they had to offer a grain offering and they had to offer a drink offering. Well, if it was no vegetation, then they couldn't even worship God. So without the rain, the children of Israel even lost their ability to even worship in the daily service. So in other words, with no rain, they couldn't even worship God. Y'all follow me? They wouldn't do it anyway. But he was showing, but here's what they like to do. Here's what they like to do. They like to take this stuff to the temple so that they can say we worship God, even though their lifestyle was out of the will of God. But God said, I ain't even gonna let you do that. I'm gonna stop the rain. You won't even be able to play worship. He said, here's what I need you to do. Here's what I need you to do. Then he said in Joel 2, he said, I want you to rend your heart and not your garment. Stop playing church. Stop just using church service as a way to make an excuse for your lifestyle that's out of my will. Stop acting like you're a Christian. And I need you to be a Christian. And God said, when you do that, when you get serious about your relationship with me, and you rend your heart and not your garment, he said, then what I'll do is I'll take your enemies, I'll push them backwards, and then I will open up the windows of heaven. I'll pour out so much rain. He said, I'm going to give you the early rain and the latter rain in the first month. I'm going to give you both. And he says, I'm going to make it so much so that the vegetation and all this stuff going to grow back, and it's going to be as though it never happened. And then Joel began to say, it shall come to pass in the last days. After all of that, I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and daughters shall prophesy. Your old man shall dream dreams. Let me stop there for a minute. See, usually if you look at the Bible, it says your old man shall dream dreams, your young man shall see visions, right? And I'm saying, Lord, why would old men dream dreams? And why would young men see visions? Shouldn't young men be dreaming dreams? And shouldn't old men be seeing visions? Because Joseph was having dreams. He was a young man. Because dreams anticipated longevity. But God is saying, when I pour that spirit out on you, you're going to have so much hope that you're going to know that it ain't over. That your life is just beginning. Even though you're old, it's just getting started. That I'm going to use you. You're going to preach the gospel. You're going to do what I've called you to do. I said, I'm going to use the old and I'm going to use the young. Old man, the young man, the sons, the daughters. And then he says, on my maids and on my handmaids, when I pour out my spirit. Now, if you notice this, watch this, y'all. When the spirit is poured out, not only is it because you're repentant, he's going to pour it out on old, young, sons and daughters, not gender specific, it's not age specific. But then he says the handmaids and then the servants. And it stops there. Then mention rich folk. In other words, it's not your economic status that gives you any type of favor with God. Matter of fact, the spirit going to be poured out on those who don't got nothing. Come on, somebody. And they're going to be used to preach the gospel and to warn people of the coming of Jesus. And they're going to tell people that Babylon is salt. is fallen, that great city, because she's made all nations drink of the wine of wrath and fornication. And the message will go out. People will leave this false doctrine, this false theology, this false white nationalistic religion, and they're going to attach to Jesus, and they're going to follow him wheresoever he goes. Because despite the challenges and despite our rights being taken away, which they eventually will, we got to fight against it, but it eventually will, that we're going to tell the truth and we're going to preach it anyhow. And it won't be, again, it won't be gender specific. It won't be age specific. It won't be economic specific. It's going to be whosoever will. Whoever turns his heart to me will be able to share that message with the world. And I want to leave you with that hope. So it's not for perfect people. Latter rain is for repentant people. People who recognize that I need God even to worship him. I need him. I need God. Pray. Let's pray. Father, we just thank you for your grace. We thank you for your mercy. We thank you for giving your son Jesus. And Lord, we see these things happening in our world today. God, we see with the white nationalist and supremacist movement, we see with the Congress being stuff happening right now, Lord. We see the man got a gun in his hand. We see that the former president committed a crime. We saw it. I watched the January 6th hearings. I saw everything. But yet we still live in a country that's so polarized, where people are still willing to justify just a known wrong so they can stay in political power and begin to enforce their rules and their laws on the minds of men. Well, we see it happen. We know, God, at some point, at the same time, that the whole world will wander after the beast. At some point, everybody's going to get in line. The Protestant Christian world will lead this thing in the United States. We are told that the false prophet will lead. But at the same time, we're also told that at some point, all the world will wander after the beast. But the people who say, Lord, we're going to stand for your word. We're going to stand for your truth. We're going to fight. But if the fight doesn't go our way, we're still going to stand up for your truth anyhow. God, help us to have that mindset. And help us, Lord, to be filled with your spirit, to have the boldness to share your word, that people might be saved in your eternal kingdom. Lord, help us again to fight while we're here, to occupy till you come. But when the time does come and you say enough is enough, I'm going to allow this thing to happen because I'm about to come. Lord, may we still be faithful. May we not be disappointed, but may we still be faithful and depend on you. We thank you for hearing. We thank you for answering. Bless us now, we pray and ask. In Jesus' name, amen.